Regular Drews, we did just want to really quickly also give a little content warning for this episode. It does deal with some pretty severe talk of suicide and mental health stuff. Also, Nancy is a police officer, so listen at your own risk. Yeah, so just, take your time going through it. And if you decide this episode is not for you, then that's fine. No hard feelings. Please skip.
Yeah, some pretty dark, heavy topics in this one. So just a quick heads up about that.
Yeah.
And without further ado.
Well, aren't you a regular Nancy Drew?
I learned that from the Nancy Drew detective.
Okay, go.
You think you can follow the clues and solve the case of the missing condiment, Nancy Drew?
Because I've read every Nancy Drew mystery ever written.
Nancy, please tell me you're joking.
Wow, you suck at this Nancy Drew stuff. You should get a new hobby.
My name is Carson Drew, and this is my assistant, Nancy.
Nancy Drew.
It's curtains for you, Miss Drew.
Nancy Drew strikes again.
A regular Nancy Drew.
Hello, Regular Drews.
Hi, everyone. We are so thrilled to be bringing you this episode today.
Oh my God.
First, I think we need to give a very, very, very special thanks to the person who sent us this episode. Very impressed with their sleuthing skills that they managed to not only track this down, but then it got taken down and they found it again and managed to send it to us. So we are so thrilled and so thankful. This was just the most exciting thing possibly all year.
Yes, because we are going to be covering the Unaired 2016 pilot, Drew, starring Sarah Shahi. So exciting.
Yes.
Because obviously this has never been put out into the world. And so probably almost all of you have not seen this and maybe don't have the opportunity to ever see it. So it's a little bit different than what we normally do. I know a lot of you like to just kind of follow along and be able to cover or read things or watch things or play things before we do the episode so you can listen along. It's probably not going to be able to do that this time.
Right.
But we were just too excited about this, and it's just kind of like too big of a deal to not cover. So,
and it was absolutely perfect timing since we're covering other TV shows anyway lately.
It's just like worked out. Like it was just perfect. Like right when we were like, what are we going to do for episode 85? This like fell into our lap. So it was like, this is what we're supposed to do, obviously. Yeah.
I think we need to talk a little bit about the history behind this one first, because of course we have the 2019 show starring Kennedy McMahon, which is what happened after this show did not get picked up. It got reworked, traded hands a few times, reworked again, ended up in the lap of the CW, and that's where we got the Kennedy McMahon show. So back in October of 2015, CBS, this is when they first announced that they were working on this. And then in January 2016, they gave the show the working title Drew and ordered the pilot episode with, of course, Sarah Shahi set to star. She was 35 years old at the time, so of course this is a little bit older of a Nancy. I don't know if they said in the show how old Nancy is supposed to be, but she's over 30 is basically what we get here. I don't know if she's 30 or 35. Who knows? But then, of course, they passed on it. I did see a bunch of articles saying that they being CBS, that they called it too female for their fall schedule, and that's why they passed on it. Who knows if that was the real reason? I did also see something else that referred to that as having been a rumor, that it wasn't really about it being too female, but that it just didn't really fit in with the rest of the shows for their fall schedule. So who knows what the actual reason was. I don't know. Maybe it's just because it's not that good. Maybe that's the reason. But no, then of course it... after they passed on it, it got picked up by NBC and it got heavily reworked. And then in this version, Nancy was supposed to be even older, like in her late 40s, early 50s. And then that got passed on as well. And then it got reworked into the CW show. So that's the brief history.
Yeah. I do think, okay, oh my God, here we go. Well, before I even say what I think, let me just say too that I from some of the things that I have read, I don't think I was involved. I didn't really have my finger on the pulse of this at the time. So I only know this in or heard about this in retrospect, but I think there was a lot of controversy about this show from its inception.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Nancy Drew didn't look like people expected Nancy Drew to look like. And that may or may not be what people had concerns about as things moved forward or whatever. But I know that at its inception, that was a cause of a lot of drama.
Yes.
And so kind of from its start, it was off to a rocky start with a lot of fans. And so I think there was a lot of Twitter controversy going on at the time. So a lot of people had a lot of feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like how things happened is probably how they were supposed to happen.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That it was supposed to get reworked, and it was a good thing that it got reworked and then got released, or then got remade into what we know as the CW show. I think that's probably for the best.
Oh, yes.
I don't think, though, that this show deserved the amount of hate and vitriol that it got at the time.
No. Well, I think a lot of the hate and vitriol, because nobody actually saw any of this or really knew anything about the premise. It was just, we don't like that Nancy is not a white character.
Thing.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely what it was. Because there was a lot of people who also were really excited about it and then were upset after it got canceled. And they were really mad that it wasn't going to happen. So.
Yeah. But even after seeing it, I didn't think it was that bad. It's not great. You know what I mean? But and I definitely don't think it's not my favorite, and I don't think it ranks very highly for me in Nancy Drew adaptions, but I don't think it was that bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was enjoyable for me to watch, and I thought it was interesting, some of the things that they did.
Mm-hmm.
I thought some of it was weird. But overall, I didn't think it was hugely bad.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think there was anything stand out as being just really awful. Oh, I can't believe they would do this kind of thing, you know? Which is some of kind of the things that I've read about it. It's oh, I can't believe they would make this, they'd do this.
Yeah.
And I just don't see that as I watch it. I thought a lot of the choices they made, even if they weren't executed really well, made sense,
mm-hmm.
you know? But yeah, what do you think, Kori?
Okay, so obviously they're with the CW show, and this isn't about the CW show, but a lot of people if they don't like it, their critique of it is that's not Nancy. They got the
Mm-hmm.
character wrong. That's not who Nancy is. They just slapped the name Nancy on it because it's a female detective. If that is your opinion, you will think that times 1,000 about this show. Because I don't think that the character is Nancy by any means. I don't know what was in the water in 2016, but I think that this show is very much a product of 2016. Not only because of the social and political environment of just what was going on in the US at that time, but also just all the Nancy Drew adaptations at this time were all trying to do the older Nancy thing. Like I just said, the show after this, they tried to send it over to NBC and make her even older. At the same time, they were also very in the early stages of the musical that was also supposed to be about grandma age Nancy. I don't know why this period in time had so much of that going on. Obviously, it never got made, any of it. But I just don't think it works, and I don't think that they should ever age Nancy up. And I think that a lot of what was successful about 16 or 18-year-old Nancy, whatever, is that age for her that allows the character to do a lot that she does, and it allows her to function the way that she functions. I think that aging her up like this, you lose a lot of those qualities of the character that make her so endearing, that she's this unexpected underdog. Some girl could never solve this mystery, but that she does, and she shows up the police in the process. It's not as effective when you have a 35-year-old woman doing that, you know? And so I think that what this was the creators were like, okay, what would a 35-year-old Nancy look like, or a 30-year-old Nancy look like? What if we took the BBC Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock show and then mashed it with the Johnny Lee Miller, Lucy Liu Elementary Sherlock adaptation from CBS and mashed them together and then just made her a girl? And I feel like it's just, what if Sherlock Holmes was a girl? And that's what this show is, because they don't really know how to take Nancy, scale her up, make her older. They just know how to make okay, we have a classic detective character, but girl. Like, it just felt like that. And there's a lot of things in the show that we'll get there when we talk about it that are directly influenced from like the BBC Sherlock, when he goes to his mind palace. Like, Nancy does that,
Yeah.
and I loved those. I love both of those shows. I absolutely love them. So this is not a critique in any way. Had this show come out, would I watch the hell out of it? Absolutely. But would I watched it and enjoyed it as it being Nancy? No, absolutely not.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. Absolutely, I see that. And I think I agree overall about like Nancy's age being a really important like marker in like a success of, whether or not something makes sense as a Nancy Drew adaptation. But I think though, ultimately at its core, like the issue is like when somebody is watching it, if they can see it as being Nancy Drew, right? But I feel like everybody's going to have a different opinion about that always.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, it's just so subjective. And cause like, I'm even thinking about like the 1995 TV show when I'm watching that, like that to me doesn't feel like Nancy Drew, but ultimately it's a really enjoyable show, And so it's like, I feel like at this point for me, when I'm watching things now, Nancy Drew adaptations now, I feel like I've kind of let it go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like,
right.
I definitely hear what you're saying about like the Sherlock and Elementary kind of influence there.
I mean, they even use the same set as Elementary. It's the same like people that worked on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think this show definitely suffers from like a lack of originality in that respect. But I think probably I think they were trying to make, I do think they were at its core trying to make a show about Nancy Drew. I don't think they started with the concept of Sherlock or Elementary. I think they probably just started with Nancy Drew and then thought, well, what do other really successful detective shows do?
Fair.
And how can we bring that into ours and make our show really successful? You know what I mean? Maybe I'm just trying to be a little generous. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I really don't think it was that bad. Okay. As a 35-year-old Nancy Drew, when I watch this, it feels, there's a part of it that feels accurate.
Okay.
And it doesn't necessarily feel pretty. And it doesn't feel fun. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that I want to watch Nancy Drew, like, as an adult navigating complicated, like, interpersonal relationships and job stuff. I don't know that I want to watch that.
Right.
But when I do see it, I'm like, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
If the concept was an adult Nancy Drew and I had to make a TV show about an adult Nancy Drew, I think that I might have done some of the same things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Which we can talk about as we get into it, but like the specifics of all of that. But like on the whole, like, yes, I agree. It doesn't feel like Nancy Drew, but I don't know that bugs me so much. And two, I think like as a detective TV show, it is formulaic and it isn't.
Yes.
It's nothing groundbreaking in that regard. But there can be things about that that's enjoyable.
Absolutely.
Like there are lots of detective shows like that I like to watch, and I know they're very popular. So I can understand what they were doing and why they were doing it. And it doesn't make me mad, I think obviously it wasn't super successful. I think, of course, the pilot did not get picked up. I think that there's a lot of weird things about the show and it feels kind of awkward a lot of the times. And so I think there's a lot of improvements that could have been made to make it into like an actually good, successful adaptation that they were trying to do. But at its core, I don't think it's that ill-conceived, I just think it's not everybody's idea,
of course. Yeah.
Anyway,
we do also have to look at it in context as well, right? Because I mean, obviously this was intended to be a very formulaic CBS mystery show. So it's going to be what you're expecting it to be, but obviously we only got the pilot. So I feel like in talking about this, we kind of have to treat it almost like the Maggie Lawson
Yes.
TV movie, because I mean, obviously not that they have much in common, but just that Maggie Lawson's show was originally supposed to be a show, and then it got canceled, and then they just used what they'd already filmed as a pilot and turned it into a TV movie. I feel like you have to treat it very differently that way, because obviously with the formulaic shows, they've got the big mystery that spans the whole season, or multiple seasons sometimes even, but then you've got the smaller mysteries every episode. I think that if we had gotten the whole season, I would have wanted Bess to be the big mystery and not the mystery of the episode. But since we only got the one episode, I'm glad that we did get to wrap it up and find out what actually did happen with Bess.
Yeah.
But if it had been like a show, I would want more time. I would have really hated that, to kill off Bess in the first, and then just she's gone now forever and we have no emotional connection to her, where if she'd been the big season-long mystery, we could have had more like flashbacks, kind of what they did like Veronica Mars, where you see Karen. Oh my gosh, Karen. That's her mean girl's name.
Lily.
Lily, thank you. Amanda Seyfried. You see Amanda Seyfried throughout the season, and so obviously she's not like a character in the current show, but you still get to know her and love her throughout the season because there are so many flashbacks, and like Veronica's like hallucinating a little bit, and we see that sometimes. But with Beth, it's just like one and done. Okay, now we don't even really introduce her before we murder her, and she's gone forever now.
So just to preface, because we did kind of jump into a big plot point there. The start of this show, Bess is dead. Yeah. Bess has died. And so that's the core of this. But yeah, no, I 100% agree. It makes no sense for her to be, her season-long arc is set up to be this Dan Foley guy, when really the issue, and she, even in the episode, we talk about how messed up Nancy is over Bess's death. Right. So really that's what's affecting her. It's not this rando guy. It's Bess being dead, her childhood friend, and her apparent suicide, you know? So it's like
just a cheap way to murder her and get her off the show for the pilot.
Yeah.
And I wish they hadn't done Bess. Maybe Helen, like I could sacrifice Helen, but not Bess. Like, don't come for Bess. Don't ever do that to me, because you've already lost me once you've killed my girl off, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I also want to complain a little bit about the visuals. Maybe I'm just spoiled from the CW show, but I feel like just looking at it, the colors are so rich and vibrant. The Drew home is so homey, and like you just feel like you're reading Nancy Drew. I didn't really feel like we got that from any of these like really gritty sets. Because Nancy's apartment, she's a huge slob. It's just this like nasty, messy brownstone that she lives in New York. So it doesn't really give me Nancy vibes in that way. And then everything else, I don't know, it's just like dirty New York, gritty vibes. And that's not really the vibes that I want from Nancy Drew. I wish that they'd found a way to make it a little bit more colorful, like, you know, that kind of stuff that makes it feel a little bit more visually like her.
I have a real easy solution for this.
Okay. Set it in River Heights.
Yeah, okay. Basically. Yeah. But we could talk about that more, I think, at the end, because I think I have a lot of ideas on how they could have fixed this and made it into something that was actually good. That's a huge part of it, is the setting. I don't think New York City makes sense. I don't think Nancy in the city makes sense. I think Nancy is a very specific character for a very specific place and time, you know? Of course, you guys have heard me talk about this before about, you know, I really want a period adaptation of Nancy Drew. I want a Nancy Drew set in the 50s or the 30s, whatever. I don't care. I want that. And I do think ultimately that would be the best, but that's a popular opinion. Everybody thinks that, you know? I don't have a problem with a modern adaptation of Nancy Drew, but I do think that putting her in New York City and trying to make her literally an NYPD cop is not the right take.
Even the 95 show wasn't like this. I feel like we still got some pretty aesthetics from the 95 show. Yeah. In a way that we did not get from this.
You can definitely see where they tried, right? Like I can see in some of Nancy's costuming, right? They put her in a lot of classic colors. The red on Sarah Shahi looks gorgeous. Yes. Like she's very, even though she is a slob in her apartment, like personally wise, she's very put together.
Yes.
So there's that. But then also she wears that yellow dress to the wedding.
Some of her outfits were really, really good in this. I will give them that. And the blue Mini Cooper, Mini Cooper was a big hit for me. Absolutely. Exactly. Some of it they did really well. I do have some glowing things to say about this show as well. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
My last big thing, though, and maybe we should
Mhm.
just save this because we will talk about it more, but why is Nancy a cop? I don't feel like it works. I don't feel like they should
Doesn't.
make her a cop because, like,
Doesn't.
as we've said, like, Nancy's whole thing is always, like, she is going to find ways to do what police can't because police are bound by, like, certain investigating rules and laws that they can and can't do certain things. But Nancy can because she's not a police officer. And she, you know, she consistently shows up the police, all that kind of stuff. And now we're putting her in this position where she is the police. I don't know. I just feel like we could have done something better. We could
I
have
100% agree.
made her. We could have had her be like a grad student. I know that this is kind of pulling from the 95 show as well. I don't want to sound like I'm just, let's do that instead. But they could have made her like a college student. And then we have like, oh, I'm working on my thesis. And that's why it's taking me so long to graduate. And Carson's funding all of this. So that's why I don't have like a real job to go to. And I say I'm working on my thesis, but really I'm just going off and solving mysteries all the time. But maybe she's like a criminology major. Maybe she's in law school or maybe she's none of those things. Maybe she's a private investigator. Maybe that's her job now. Or maybe she's a lawyer or a journalist or something like that. I feel like all of those things would fit better than just straight out cop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. And I think that gets to like the core of my issues with this is kind of the role that Nancy plays. But to put it in like a larger context, like I think that's ultimately this show's struggle, right? Is that they're trying to make a cop procedural show with Nancy Drew.
That feels like a 2016 decision right there, honestly.
Yes. And that is wrong. That's what's wrong, is that they're trying to make a cop procedural show with Nancy Drew as the star. Nancy Drew as a series as a whole throughout time is not a cop procedural show or a cop procedural at all. They're detective novels. Okay. And so when you look at like a detective novel and what a detective novel is, it's anti-authoritarian, right? It's against the major structure. It's rebellious. It's individualistic, right? There are these hallmarks of detective fiction that they just don't play in a police procedural. Right. Not that police procedurals aren't good and aren't great, and that they don't make good television, but Nancy Drew as a police procedural doesn't make sense. Right. Which is the problem with this. And ultimately that's my solution as to how to fix it. But I think what the struggle with this and with Nancy Drew that I think just warps people's brains is that it's so successful. It's been so successful. Nancy Drew as a, IP has been successful for 100 years. Like it's long standing, like it's so many things have come from it. And so I think people want to capture that again, right? They want to make a really, really successful thing. And I get that. And so you want to draw on things that are currently successful because that's what makes sense in your brain. But that's just not the reality. That Nancy is actually the reason why she's so popular, and the reason why is because it's kind of radical. Yeah. Like looking at it historically, the concept of Nancy Drew was a radical idea. Yes. It was so like unexpected and so fresh. And so in order to recapture that magic, you really need to come at it with a fresh perspective, with something that is new and interesting and exciting and can stand alone, can stand by itself. And like when I think about shows that have been able to successfully do this, I do think about the CW show.
Yes, big time. That was very fresh with the hauntings and everything.
It's such a new concept. And yes, it's a very popular concept now. And so it did kind of jump on that bandwagon. But that's why it was able to be successful, because that was a new idea. Like that's a new frontier for TV shows. And I think about like other successful TV shows and how they managed to become, I think about things like Veronica Mars. That was a, like we didn't get TV shows about teen, like private detectives, you know what I mean? Right. So like, that's why that was successful. So like, in order to get a really successful Nancy Drew TV show, you can't do what's going to make it on mainstream, like on CBS, prime time. Like, it's just not going to work. That's just not the vibe.
It has to be niche. Sorry, but it does.
It does. It has to be. But yeah, anyway.
I also feel like the cop thing is a little bit of a betrayal of the original mysteries, like
Yeah, absolutely.
we're focusing too much. And again, the mystery genre is just so broad that it's hard to get exactly where you're trying to land, right? And so we've leaned a little bit too cop this way, but the mysteries that Nancy is solving is not hard-boiled crime, and that's what they're treating this as. She's not Miss Murder Investigation. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
later in the files, sure, we've got some of that, and that's always fun to do something like that. But a lot of the stuff that she's looking at, she's not solving it to figure out who committed this crime. It's not even a
No.
crime sometimes. It's just like something
She's just
weird
righting
happened.
wrongs.
And we want to
Yeah.
know what happened. Why is
Right.
this way? Who is doing this? What is their motive? It's more about solving the mystery.
It's more cerebral.
Right. And so it
Yeah.
feels like maybe the writers, the creators of this, no offense to them, but it feels like maybe they just didn't know the character as well as they should have and didn't see that, like, yeah, it's actually not going to fit very well to suddenly turn it into, a cop, pure, like, legal, investigative, bureaucratic. No.
Yeah.
That's just not Nancy. It's just not. It's never been, and we don't need to turn her into that just because she's older now.
Well, and I think there was a way that you could even take you could take this episode and you could turn it into the right thing. You could fix it. You could make it.
You could have her start off as a cop and then realize it's not for her. And then, I'm going to go do my PI thing now because,
this is.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think even starting her out as a cop can make a lot of sense if you think about what Nancy Drew would want to grow up to do.
Right.
Of course, she would want to continue detecting, and the place to do that is be a detective on a police force. That just makes sense.
Right.
But then, have Nancy fail at that. And the thing is with a detective story, it's tropic, right? But this is not the case for Nancy Drew, so you don't have to do this. But it makes a lot of sense to start your detective out low, right? Like, they're in a bad place. Like, they have struggled. Like, they're having problems. You know what I mean? And so to start Nancy there as a slob, even though that doesn't make sense, or to our conception of Nancy, to start her as like getting fired, like things that they just don't fit into what our conception of Nancy is.
Right.
I think it makes sense to start there, provided that in our character arc, we see her become or go back to what it was that made her successful, right? And so, so she could start as a detective, be like, "This, I really can't do this. This isn't for me. I'm gonna move back home and kind of restart."
Right.
Like, duh.
That would have been great.
Why don't we do that?
They even hinted at her doing that and moving back home at one point.
They did. I was like, we literally have. We'll talk about it, but we literally have the place that Bess was going to rent out. Like, we could just make it anyway.
And don't kill Bess off. Make it a Topham sister. Kill off one of the Topham sisters instead, or somebody that Nancy knows. But we have to talk about the Topham sisters later. But one more thing. I will say as well, Sarah Shahi, after it got canceled or wasn't picked up, I guess that's not really a cancellation. But after it was decided that this was not going ahead and people were freaking out because they wanted a Nancy Drew TV show and were upset that it wasn't going to air, Sarah Shahi herself got on Twitter and was like, "Guys, this was a bad show. I didn't like it. I didn't want this to happen." So if that tells you anything, I think that says a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, 3 words?
Well, sorry, one thing I want to say, too, about this show is that I do think it's subtly hilarious. I don't think it's supposed to be, but I found myself laughing a lot. Because I think there's an awkwardness to it.
Yes.
So I think it was just kind of a lot of situations were just funny. And then also, sorry, that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. Right. But yeah. Okay. But yes, 3 words.
Okay. Pickles?
Pickles.
Why is that such a big storyline?
Why pickles? What's with the pickles? Why? Yes, pickles, absolutely. And then I kind of went on like a P theme. Okay. The letter P, not urine. Just to clarify that. So my brief for this is pickles, policing, and pregnancy.
Perfect. No notes. Let's start the summary.
Okay, great.
Okay, you want to start us off?
Okay. Sure. So at the very start, immediately right off the bat, we see this clip of Bess falling off a roof. That's just how it starts. That's how it opens with with Bess. I think she's wearing like a white dress even or something.
Just a sundress. Yep.
Just falling off the roof. Very Wilkie Collins opening. Okay, I see you, but like, wow. So that's what we're getting into.
Yes.
And then immediately we just see like 6 months later, Nancy is a Lyft driver. She's driving for Lyft. She's driving around New York City in her bright blue Mini Cooper, which yes, we talked about.
Adorable.
Yes, cute.
So perfect.
But then like the snappy music starts playing. Like I think there's literal snaps in it.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, we just had Bess falling off a roof, and now we're getting like this snappy intro. There are some tone problems here. And it's been 5 seconds. So she's driving around in New York City for Lyft. She goes to this hotel and is standing, like she gets out of her car, standing like leaning against her car, which is not what Lyft drivers do. And we see a woman come out and also she's wearing a red leather jacket. The red leather jacket is iconic.
It is.
Though.
It is.
That's iconic.
I feel like that's a subtle Tracy Ryan homage, which I love. Yeah.
So she gets out of the car and then a woman comes out of the hotel and asks if she's her Lyft driver. And Nancy says, yep, that's me, Nancy Drew.
That's how you know she's Nancy.
Which is just so cheesy.
It is. It was rough, yeah.
It's goofy. The Mini Cooper is cute. I don't even mind Nancy driving for Lyft, right? Because like I was talking about, if you want to start her off really low and doesn't make that, fine. Okay. But like, she gets out of the car and like, yep, that's me. I'm Nancy Drew. I'm like, are you kidding? Are you serious? So it needs a different, better intro.
Yeah, I don't mind her driving for Lyft at all. I actually think that kind of works for her character.
Right, because it allows her to get around and she's kind of an excuse for being places.
I think it works really well, actually.
It does. And also like thinking about like the original mystery stories, like pre-revisions. Nancy and her blue roadster, like that's just like such a... the reason why Nancy could solve these mysteries is because she had a car.
Right.
And not a lot of people had a car at the time, but she was able to have one because her dad was wealthy, and she's able to drive around because she didn't have any other responsibilities. So she was just taking her car out, going to all these random small towns and solving random small town mysteries. Like that's part of that charm. And so I could totally see that. But so anyway, so Nancy's driving this lady around and she just like suddenly like swerves off the road and pulls over. Essentially, she goes into like what could be described as, yes, a Sherlockian deduction monologue about how she knows that this woman is in town for an interview and that she can tell that she's nervous about it. And because of her Lyft rating, she can tell that this woman she's driving is a good person. And so Nancy, who never wants the bad guys to win, really wants to help her. And she needs to go into the store that Nancy just pulled up to buy a new blouse because there's a coffee stain on her current blouse. And Nancy really wants her to get this job. And if she doesn't get a new shirt, then she's going to be so distracted by the coffee stain that she's going to be nervous and bomb the interview. So she needs to go get a new shirt. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like this either. Yeah.
And then I think then we have our title card, right? Which is just Drew.
I think it comes before. I think it's after she says Nancy Drew, maybe. Just Drew.
Oh, no, you're right. It is. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't actually write that in because it wasn't really consequential. It wasn't like they did a full intro thing. It was just a title card. So
yeah, there's not really any like intro music, anything like that. It just Drew.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And I guess they did this because they're trying to demonstrate Nancy's insane deduction skills and about her character, that like she's ultimately good and she wants to help the little guy, which I can see, but that's just not really a theme in any of the rest of the show, like any of this episode of TV. So it's it feels out of place, kind of clunky. It doesn't really make sense. Yeah, so it just seems, and ends up coming off as a little bit ridiculous that this is happening. Like Nancy is driving for Lyft. Like maybe she should just drop her off, you know? Do you want to take it?
Oh, sure. Then after Nancy finishes her Lyft driving for the day, she is just sitting in her car on just some quiet street in New York. And she's reading a news article. And we also hear the radio is also talking at the same time about this topic while she's reading the news article. But essentially, there is this photographer named Dan Foley who is suing the NYPD and Nancy separately for wrongful arrest. Essentially, he was accused of having murdered his photography assistant, who her name was Anna Finch. But Nancy was like, she was the arresting officer. She was super convinced that he was guilty, really pushed for like getting a conviction. And then I guess nothing really happened, or they weren't able to find the evidence. And so he was let go, but then Nancy kept pushing it. So he's been exonerated essentially, but is suing Nancy for defamation and this wrongful arrest and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So now because she's left the police force, that's why she's a Lyft driver, obviously.
Yeah.
And we happen to see where she's parked on the side of the road happens to be outside of his apartment. She's stalking him.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she's just like watching him come and go from his place while reading this article, which we'll learn in a second was written by Ned.
Yeah.
So then Nancy goes back.
Oh, I didn't even realize that was the article that she was talking about.
Well, I mean, we only see the headline of the article, so we can't like read what is said in the article, but she'll tell us in a few minutes what's about the article. Yeah. But then we see her go back to her apartment. It's pretty late at night at this point, and I guess she lives in this old brownstone. Like I said, it's pretty messy. The furniture's just kind of like everywhere. I don't know.
But it is like the nicest New York City apartment that you will like ever see. I mean,
It's
like
massive.
aside from like, it's not like a penthouse or anything. It's not like Gossip Girl level apartment, but it's like gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's spacious. There's these beautiful big windows. Like probably today's day and age, that costs at least $1 million.
It must have in 2016. Yeah.
I mean, like, yikes.
Ugh. Yeah. So she's at this huge house. So she walks in and she sees George is already in her apartment, has showed up unannounced. And she's like, how'd you get in? And she's like, your spare key. We used to be friends, remember? And she's sitting on Nancy's couch watching an old video of them from when they were like teenagers. And I guess it's Bess's birthday because it's just this shot of them singing happy birthday to teenage Bess. And George is like, yeah, I can see that you've been kind of like out of touch lately because obviously you're just sitting around watching all these old videos of Bess because I walk in and this is just what's on your TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, Nancy, you've been wallowing. You've only got 2 beers and a fuzzy tomato in your fridge. You dropped out of your dream job out of nowhere. Carson's been trying to call you. You're not returning his calls. And in fact, he called me because he's so worried about you. And then we get to the point. Yes. Okay. So Bess died by suicide 6 months ago, and Nancy was the responding officer. She was the first one to the scene. So she basically like saw it happen and is extremely traumatized by this, understandably so. And Nancy is George tells her to move on.
That she needs to move on. It's been 6 months.
It's been 6 months
since she saw her friend's body plastered on the sidewalk. Oh my God.
And then had to be the one to conduct the investigation. Yeah.
Oh,
okay. So, and George even says, like, I'm the one that's been with Bess's mom going over baby books and, like, consoling her. Like, that's your aunt. Calm down.
F you, George. F you. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But Nancy is not convinced that this was a suicide. She says, I got this voicemail from Bess 2 days before she died, and she seemed so happy. She was talking about, like, going with us to get burritos. Like, she seemed great. And George says, no, that note that she left implies otherwise. She was struggling. We're never going to get over it. We don't have to get over it. We're never going to understand it, but we do have to accept it. And we just need to accept it and move on. Because 6 months is too much to be sad for too long of a time. Anyway. Also, we learned that George is engaged. She's getting married, and she asked Nancy about her RSVP, and Nancy's like, of course I'm going to be there. Yeah.
Also, this is a great point to mention that George is gay.
Yes.
She's marrying a woman.
Yes.
We're
not going to meet her just yet. She'll be in like the next scene, but her name is Stephanie, and we're obsessed with this. I love it.
I love it too.
But then George gets a phone call, and she says, hey, this is about a case that I could use your help with. A guy was shot in the park, and the only witness there was blind. So we learn that George is also a cop, and Nancy and her were partners on the force before Nancy resigned. So now George has this new partner, and she's kind of annoyed about it.
Yeah.
You want to take it from here?
Sure. So the next day, Nancy is walking somewhere. I think she's on her way to George's. It's not really clear. And she's like ambushed by Ned. He's just like on the corner and he sees her, which is like, I don't think this is how New York City works, but who knows?
This is the worst portrayal of Ned in that it's the most accurate portrayal. It's the best portrayal of Ned in that Ned is the worst he's ever been.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ned is a reporter in this iteration of Nancy, which I actually kind of like. I like Ned as a reporter.
That works, yeah.
I think that's a good choice because we have some history of Ned working for newspapers in the series. I think that makes sense. But Nancy is, of course, pissed at him for writing this article that implied that she botched the Dan Foley investigation. And apparently, I think he released this article. At first I thought he released this article right after Bess died, but now maybe not. Maybe.
So the investigation took place right after Bess died, like 2 weeks later,
Okay.
but then this article came out like yesterday, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so Nancy is like, this investigation happened right after Bess died. So like I was vulnerable at the time that like I did this. And essentially like you're betraying me by releasing this article. Like you suck. And in typical Ned fashion, he defends his trash behavior, saying that he was just following the story. And Nancy would do the same thing if she were him.
That's arguable.
Yeah, I suppose. I think Ned does have some good points sometimes.
Yeah. she might do something pretty similar, to be honest. I don't know if she would give him the grace. I don't know.
I think Nancy would at least feel bad about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And not try to excuse it. Be like, I was right.
Not try to excuse it.
Yeah.
Ned is just a defensive a-hole, in my opinion. But anyway, he then like totally changes the subject, like back to Bess, and like drops this massive bomb on all of us, which I think this might be the most interesting part of this whole episode for me. He tells us that Bess approached him a couple months before she died about being a sperm donor for her because she wanted a baby and was tired of waiting for the right guy.
Oh my gosh. Because apparently they're all childhood friends, all four of them.
Right.
And so trusts him enough.
Okay. But this little plot point here, this is the thing that makes me think that the people who made this TV show had a better idea, had a better finger on the pulse of what was happening with Nancy Drew than we want to give them credit for.
Okay.
Because I think this is scary accurate. Like, I think that if Bess is in her 30s or whatever, she is totally tired of waiting for the right guy to come around.
Okay.
I think she would be wanting to start a family.
Mm-hmm.
And I 100% think that it is kind of weird that Nancy and Ned were together when Bess approached him about this. I think maybe she would just independently find a sperm donor from like a sperm bank or something. But she likes Ned. She thinks Ned's a good guy. She wants what Ned and Nancy have.
Right.
For her, she would 100% want someone like Ned to be the sperm donor for her baby.
I will say, what little glimpses were given of Bess in this, I do like the characterization of Bess. Like, I think the actress that they cast looks how I'd imagine Bess to be. Obviously, she doesn't get any lines or anything like that. It would have been nice to, like, actually see her act. But yeah, I do think that kind of behavior tracks with what we'd expect of Bess when she gets older. So that works.
That's just wild. Just so wild. Like, thinking, like, oh my God, like, this is what this show was wanting to talk about. Like, woof. Crazy. But yes, very far away from what we think about when we think about Nancy Drew.
Yeah. This is not a kid's show by any means. Not even a teen show. Like, this is for adults. Yeah.
Yes. This is adult problems, fertility, and all this crap. Like, whoa. Just wild. Anyway, so she told him that she wanted to approach him to see if he'd be willing to do this before she talked to Nancy about it, because she was going to talk to Nancy about it. So it wasn't like she's trying to go behind Nancy's back or anything. She just, I guess, really wanted that baby, sperm donor. Crazy. Anyway, but Ned says he wasn't going to do it because he and Nancy were finally in a good place and he didn't want anything to come between them or potentially jeopardize that, which I guess, okay, good. One good decision from Ned.
Yeah.
Thank God, he said no. But anyway, he says that, like, he misses her too or something. Like, this is his excuse for, like, his vile behavior because he misses Bess as well, and Nancy doesn't deserve to be so wrapped up in herself and her own grief because he's grieving too.
Okay.
Annoying. But then Nancy, like, storms off because she's pissed, and she goes to George's beautiful apartment also. Tell me how a New York cop can afford this. I guess her fiance is a doctor, so maybe that's why. But
maybe,
like,
yeah.
Woo, another beautiful set.
Yes.
And yes, George's fiance Stephanie is there, so we get to meet Stephanie. And Nancy tells George that she just ran into Ned. George kind of misunderstands, and thinks that Nancy is talking about something that she hasn't had a chance to tell Nancy yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that Ned has a current girlfriend named Lindsay, and he's bringing her to George's wedding.
This scene was actually really funny because George says, yeah, there's this +1. Her name's Lindsay. And Nancy goes, I don't care about Kelsey.
Well, it's also funny the way that George brings it up too. She goes, yes, Stephanie, like, as soon as Nancy walks in, she says, I ran into Ned. George is like, yeah, Stephanie made me give him a +1. Her name is Lindsay, and she ordered a vegetarian meal. Like, just telling her, like, everything that she knows about the situation, which is just so funny.
And she goes, I promise I'll be mean to her. I won't even say hi to her at the wedding.
Okay, but also, can we talk about, too, how Ned was just telling Nancy that he misses her, and, like, he has a girlfriend.
The snake?
What? Oh? So Ned's just a cheater,
yeah,
I guess, is what we're...
Boo.
Uh-huh. Anyway.
Boo. Boo, Ned.
So this is all very funny. And see, this is what I mean. This is what I'm talking about. Is I think the bones are there. Like, I think the structure, I think the characters, even if, like, the situation's wrong, I think at the core, I think they get it.
Yeah.
Anyway. So, Nancy asks George. So Nancy then is like, no, I don't care. That's not the issue. I need you to ask the medical examiner to check and see if they did a pregnancy test for Bess when they were doing
autopsy.
the autopsy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And George is like, what? And Nancy's like, yeah, like, she was apparently wanting to get pregnant. So, like, was she pregnant? And George says she doubts that they did the test, but she will check to see. And Nancy promises that, like, after this last lead, like, I will drop it. Like, if it turns out to be nothing, like, this is it. I just need to know, right? And then George asks, isn't it Nancy's gotcha day? Which is a typical way that people talk about adoption anniversaries. They call it gotcha days. So Nancy was adopted by Carson and her mom. Interesting. And I think that this is probably because this is how they were trying to introduce diversity, right? Because Sarah Shahi is not white. And so this is how they were trying to be like, well, this is why Nancy is she was adopted. I don't know that that's really necessary.
It's fine. I don't really care.
Yeah.
We could have had Nancy's mom be not white. We do see a picture of her on Carson's desk. She's not, she is white. She's a white woman and Carson's also white. So,
right.
Yeah. We didn't have to do the adoption thing, but I'm not against it by any means. I don't think that it matters.
No, it doesn't really impact anything. It's just an interesting choice.
Also, I mean, not to spoil the CW show, but...
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I just think that it's interesting that the very next iteration, they're like, let's rework this, but keep the adoption thing for some reason.
Yeah, but you don't know it.
You don't know it.
So,
whatever. Not important.
Yeah. So, because George reminds her that this is like her adoption date anniversary, she quickly runs off to Carson's law office because apparently it's like this tradition between the two of them is that they always celebrate together with cupcakes, which is really sweet. Yeah. So she goes there. They look at the photo of the first moment where her mom held her after she was adopted. It's very sweet and sad. And they talk about her mom. And how she isn't here anymore, of course. So it's a really sweet little scene. But Carson is like, okay, well, this is not just happy family fun time right now. Like, you've been avoiding me. You haven't been answering my phone calls. What's going on, right? And then we get a little bit more backstory about this case and basically Nancy's like feelings about it. And she's telling Carson that, like, Ned's article, everything Ned said in his article was true. Like, she was emotional after Bess died. She wasn't thinking straight. She should have taken time off, but instead just threw herself into the Stan Foley case and made a mistake. And so she feels really bad about it. She's like horribly guilty. She's like racked with guilt. And that's kind of follows through in this entire episode. She's dealing with not just her grief about Bess's death, but like her guilt in her believing that she like chased down the wrong man, you know? And the Carson basically tells her, like, don't let it get you down. Like, good detectives can still make mistakes and use it as an opportunity to be better, basically, right? He also tells her that Hannah is worried about her, and so is Maya, who we learn is his 30-year-old girlfriend.
Are you ready to be furious?
They changed it from Isabel Topham.
They did.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A Topham sister? Really, Carson?
Can you imagine?
Who is maybe the same age as or even younger than Nancy in this iteration? Because she's supposed to be 30 and Nancy's 30 to 35, somewhere in there. What? Why? Why did we have to do this? One thing to give Carson a girlfriend at all, that's controversial in and of itself, but a 30-year-old? Carson.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well.
Anyway.
And Carson says, like, oh, actually, there was something I wanted to talk to you about. You know, it's a good thing you came, right? It's been why I've been trying to reach you. But then Nancy gets a text from George. Like, right then she looks at it, and it says that Bess was pregnant.
Poor Bess.
I know. And so Nancy is obviously very distracted, so she just leaves. And she goes to talk to George about this. George tells Nancy that Bess was 7 weeks pregnant, and Nancy assumes, knowing Bess and like how meticulous she was, that she must have known about it, because she used like, you know, all of these like period tracking apps or whatever. And if she was actively trying to get pregnant at the time, like
she would have known. She would have been checking. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Nancy thinks that this changes everything that they know about Bess's death, because she would never have jumped off of a roof if she was pregnant. I think this is bad characterization here, because that's just not the case. Like, it's just not how suicidality works.
Right.
Like, and also like it might be more likely, I don't know the statistics on this, but it might be more likely if you were pregnant that you might consider, you know, dying, or might consider suicide because of like changes in your body, like chemical stuff that you don't have the control
hormonal
over, you know what I mean?
things affect you big time.
Right.
Yeah.
So like that's just not accurate, but I understand why Nancy might think that, you know.
The depiction of mental health in this is not stellar.
Great. No. So she thinks that this means that someone murdered Bess.
Yikes.
You gonna take it?
Sure. So at this point, they decide that they're going to go talk to some of Bess's business partners, Alex and Marley, because Bess was in the pickle business.
I almost did a spit take because I was drinking water just then. Yeah.
So the company was called Bess's Best Pickles. And Alex and Marley, the business partners, are carrying on the business now that Bess is gone. And we learn that the roof of the factory where they make these pickles is actually where Bess was pushed or jumped or whatever we think may have happened there.
Yeah.
We also learn that the guy, Alex, hit on Nancy at Bess's funeral. And he awkwardly apologizes and is like, it's because I was grieving. And Nancy is so nice about it. It was like, I was grieving too. People are weird when they're grieving. It's cool. We're good. And then they're like, you know, we've already told our statements to the cops. Like, why are you asking about it again, essentially? And they explain, you know, we have reason to believe Bess was pregnant at the time, and they are absolutely shocked by this. They had no idea that she was pregnant, but they do say, oh, you know, she was online dating like crazy, so maybe that's how she got pregnant, was one of the guys that she met on this app. And George says, you know, there's no record of her at any fertility clinic in New York or anything like that, so, you know, maybe this is, maybe there's something to that theory. And then also Marley, the woman who is Bess's other partner, was the first on the scene after Bess died. So they ask her and she's like, you know, I don't remember anyone like suspicious that I saw like leaving the scene that night. But, you know, it was kind of chaos right then. So who knows? So at this point, Nancy suggests that she and George go back to Bess's old apartment and look through her stuff to see if they can figure out what dating apps she might have been using. So they go to her old apartment, and Nancy realizes when they walk in that everything is exactly like Bess left it. And George kind of explains that she couldn't bring herself to pack up all of Bess's things, so she has just been paying Bess's rent this entire time.
For 6 months.
Yeah, says something about how like money that she was going to use for her wedding, she's just been using to pay off Bess's apartment.
Oh my God.
So in the apartment, they find her laptop, and they do also find some antidepressants. So we know that she was seeing a therapist. And George decides that she is going to try to get a court order for the therapist's notes to see if there was anything in the notes. This makes me so mad. I hate this. So Nancy opens up the laptop. She finds the website that Bess was using for her dating apps, and they start trying to guess her password. And they're like, oh, everybody uses like their pet's name. So what was Bess's dog's name? Oh, Chief. She had that dog Chief when we were growing up. And then a number. What was Bess's goal weight? 115. Okay, that's her password. So her password is her childhood pet and her goal weight.
Oh my God.
Because we cannot, even in 2016, miss an opportunity to dig at Bess's weight. We can't get away from it. You're right. We can't. Okay, so we get into the dating app or whatever, and so we're able to find like a list of guys that she'd been messaging. All great. I guess there's also something in her calendar about when she went on these dates with specific guys, so they can try to also like backdate the pregnancy that way.
I think so. It's like literally the website that she's using has like a calendar in it, so it's date scheduling within the. I was like, there's no. Why would they do that? So sophisticated. So weird. Anyway,
let me send you a calendar invite for our meetup. Okay. So anyway, Nancy's going to try to work on figuring out, like, backdating the pregnancy and everything, trying to figure out which guys could have been the viable father candidates. I don't know. And then George is going to work on the therapy notes thing. So first, George is going to go over to the hospital where her fiance Stephanie works. Love this. Okay, so Stephanie actually says, yeah, I know the doctor that prescribed those antidepressants, but she refuses to like go talk to that doctor and ask about it because confidentiality. And George is like, well, Bess is dead. And the doctor's like, well, Stephanie's like, yeah, it still covers you. HIPAA still protects you after you've passed away. Yeah. I feel like George should know that, but
yeah, as a cop,
This is just a side note, and we'll get into this later because it does get even worse later, but I feel like there's a lot of over-explaining cop language to Nancy. Like, they take a lot of opportunities for George to be like, yes, because I'm a police officer, this means this. And Nancy goes, oh, that makes so much sense. It's like, Nancy, you were a police officer. You should know what BOLO stands for.
Yeah. Well, and also in the episode, they imply, too, that Nancy was a better detective than George is. And so it's like, of course she would know better than George. So it's just weird.
We don't need the scene of Nancy looking confused and be like, George, what does BOLO stand for? Like, come on, please. Okay. But anyway, so Stephanie is telling George, you need to go get a court order for the antidepressant thing. But George says that she is reluctant to do this because she hasn't told her lieutenant, which is not Chief McGinnis. It's Lieutenant Ford is the police officer's name. I guess maybe they were saving that to keep Chief McGinnis in River Heights. Maybe we were planning to meet him later or something.
Maybe.
Anyway, so Lieutenant, her boss, does not know about this yet. So she doesn't want him to think that she's too much like Nancy. Because I guess the lieutenant has like some weird thing with Nancy. Oh, and this was a good line. And Stephanie's like, oh, well, it's really great that you're not going to ask him because, the guy that murdered Bess is going to be really excited because you dropped the ball on this. And she's like, oh, I guess that's a good point. Yeah, I guess I do need to go look into this some more. And then we actually get another really hilarious scene here. I kind of really love the scene because Nancy and George are sitting at a bar and they are essentially running through the list of guys that Nancy has put together who have previously been on a date with Bess. And it just devolves into this excuse for Nancy to berate these men for not having liked Bess more.
Yes.
And so like the first guy will show up and it's like a montage scene. So the first guy shows up and she shows a picture like, do you remember this girl? Like, oh yeah, I think we went on a date. And Nancy's like, yeah, and you never called her back. What's wrong with you?
You should remember her. Why don't you remember her? She was perfect.
She's beautiful and radiant and you would be so lucky to have the time of her day. And so Nancy's doing the interviewing, but George is sitting directly behind Nancy, just listening to all this happen. So we go through this like list of guys that Nancy's just berating in this montage for not liking Bess enough, and they all just kind of leave awkwardly. But then this sweetie Petey shows up, just the sweetest guy. His name's Noah. He comes in, he's like, he sees the picture that Nancy shows him, and he's like, oh yeah, Bess was wonderful. We went on this coffee date and ended up turning into a whole weekend. Like we spent the whole weekend together. And then I had to go overseas for 2 months for work, like directly after that weekend. But like Bess and I were texting the entire time that I was gone, and we were talking a lot, and everything was going really great. And we were going to like get together when I got back. And then right before the trip ended, she just ghosted me. And I just assumed that she didn't want to be with me anymore. And I came home and I just kind of let it go. And yeah, it was just really sad. But I mean, how is she? And Nancy's like, well, she's dead. And he's like, oh, well, I guess that's a good excuse for not texting me back, right? And so he's obviously just devastated by this news. And he says, oh, I need some air. And so he leaves.
Yeah.
So he's so upset. Nancy decides that they're not going to tell him about the pregnancy because that's just going to make things worse. And they also mention like he wouldn't have done anything to her. He genuinely really liked her, and it's not like this was like a motive for murder or anything like that.
He has an alibi because he was out of the country.
Exactly.
You know? Like,
yeah. Same.
So.
So they don't think that he is responsible, but obviously somebody is. So we're back to square one, figuring out who would have had the motive to hurt her. Do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So they go back to Bess's apartment to like theorize. Okay, well, like what else can we do? Who else would have done this? And they keep coming back to her business, right? Because she was the face of that business. That seems like maybe the only reason why someone might want to kill her. And then Nancy finds a sticky note on Bess's wall with this address on it. And George looks it up and sees that it doesn't exist. Like if it did exist, it would be in the middle of the Hudson River. So like, what the heck does this mean? Maybe it's just nothing.
Right.
But then this is such an interesting scene. I love this scene. There's this knock on the door, and it's the police. They say, NYPD, open up. And George opens it. And when the cops see that it's George, they recognize her as a detective because she shows them her badge and everything. So they like apologize. They tell her that they had gotten a report of a break-in here. Apparently Bess's neighbor called it in, or Bess's neighbor actually comes out. And she says that she thought that someone had broken into Bess's apartment and that it was quote unquote all starting up again.
Huh.
More like, what does that mean? And the neighbor explains that like, she saw a man knock on Bess's door 2 weeks ago, and George is like, what are you talking about? And the neighbor says that Bess was dealing drugs.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
So Nancy decides to track down this guy that knocked on Bess's door a couple weeks ago from the security footage at her apartment. He was apparently wearing like a Hudson University t-shirt or something. So she knew he was a student, so she's able to track him down that way. Also, I thought that was interesting. Hudson University.
They didn't want to use a real school name.
Yes. I was like, what's the point of that? Is it because we don't want to imply that someone at NYU or Columbia or something would be doing drugs?
Right.
Like, are we serious? Like, come on, anyway.
I feel like that's a thing in shows generally, regardless of if it's like a student stealing drugs or just something normal. They just make up a school name because probably that school doesn't want to be mentioned or something on TV. Who knows?
But like, I think that's just crazy because like you're in New York, like people know what you're talking about.
People know what schools are in New York, yeah.
Anyway, so she tracks down this guy and he tells her, no, like Bess, I didn't go there because Bess was dealing drugs. I wasn't going to buy drugs. I was going there because I heard that she was paying people to go to rehab. Phew. What is going on here?
Yeah.
But meanwhile, while Nancy's talking to this guy, George is at the precinct getting chewed out by her boss for getting a warrant for the therapist's records behind his back. She didn't tell him about this. And basically, this boils down to that he tells her that she should not be investigating Bess's murder and that she needs to rip up the warrant and just get back to her actual job, which is what he's paying her for. So, yikes. But then we flash back to Nancy, who's having like a longer conversation with the student. She's like getting his whole story. And basically he tells her that he's sober now, but he's like white knuckling it. Like he doesn't know, like he might use again. And he's really struggling. And his sponsor told him that he needed to go to rehab, but he can't afford rehab right now. Like his parents can't afford it. Like he's a college student, right? He's broke. So his sponsor told him about Bess, who apparently would, pay people to go to this really nice rehab facility in the city. And so this guy tried to track her down to see if he would pay for his rehab. And Nancy doesn't think that this makes any sense, right? Because Bess was just starting her own business. And so she wasn't exactly like flush with cash. Like this pickle business is not lucrative.
Right.
Like there's not, she did not have a lot of money, but this guy is like pretty sure that it was Bess that was doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what is going on here? So Nancy goes to visit George at the precinct, and she meets Marcus, who's George's new partner. It's kind of uneventful. But then she tells George, that she arranged for Carson to end up paying for this kid's rehab. So
I missed that part. That's nice. Okay.
Yeah, he's taken care of. He's got into rehab. But then in this process, Nancy ended up talking to the director of that rehab, and he told her that, yes, in the 6 months before Bess died, she sponsored 10 different people to go to rehab at $30,000 each.
Oh.
So that's $300,000 that she shelled out for just people she doesn't know to go into this rehab program.
That is not pickle money.
Is not pickle money.
Mm.
So, like, where would she get that money from? What is going on? But so then this is horrible. She and George get into this really kind of public fight at the precinct. Like they're fighting in front of everybody, and it's really awful. Because Nancy wants to go look at Bess's computer, like now, to see if they can figure out anything about where she was getting this money. But George is like, no, I can't just drop everything. I'm working. Like, I can't leave. And then Nancy kind of accuses George that she doesn't care about Bess. And George tells Nancy, like, of course I care about Bess. You don't care about Bess. You flaked off and quit the force when I really needed you. So it's just really, it's messy. And Nancy ends up storming off and leaving. And she goes to stake out Dan Foley's place again, I guess, because this is like somehow like comforting.
I was about to say, this is her coping mechanism, is stalking this photographer.
What the hell? That's so weird. But then Ned catches her. He's like outside Dan's apartment, and he tells her that he just so happens to be bringing some of Dan's kids' drawings to him because Dan's wife won't talk to him. And I guess he and Dan are like friends now after Ned wrote the article that he did, which is just...
Ned, you're the worst. Why are you doing this to Nancy? And still wants her back, by the way.
Yes, while he's dating another woman named
Kelsey or Lindsay or whoever.
Anyway, so he tells Nancy that she can't be here, which, right, duh, she can't. She's literally stalking the guy. But then Dan comes out of his apartment, I guess, to meet Ned, and he sees Nancy there. Of course, he's pissed. He tells her that she ruined his life, and she's the reason why his wife won't let his kids see him, et cetera, et cetera. And Nancy, of course, feels really horrible about this, as we know, but she just doesn't know what she's supposed to say because it's like, you can't just say you're sorry. Like, she ruined this guy's life. Like, there's a lot more needed there. So she's awkward and ends up just leaving, which is so weird and sad. Mm-hmm. But the next day, George brings donuts to Nancy as kind of like an apology. She says that she was too reliant on Nancy when Nancy was her partner at the force, just like when they were kids, how she'd wait for Nancy to solve things. And she tells Nancy that she did leave and George was sad about it, but she's become a better cop since she left. So she's not really mad about it. She's not upset, right? And then she gives Nancy the warrant that she got and tells her that, the lieutenant won't let me serve it. So I don't know what to do. I guess I'll just leave it right here because I can't use it. And you better not use it, Nancy, because it would be really wrong to pretend that you're a cop when you're not a cop anymore, because the therapist definitely wouldn't notice that and, tell you things. And that would be wrong. We don't want to do that.
Right. Can't break any laws. We cannot be morally gray here, Nancy. Don't do it.
So Nancy goes to the therapist's office and serves the warrant.
That does feel like her character. It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. She tells Nancy that the therapist tells Nancy that Bess was happy when she found out she was pregnant and stopped taking the antidepressants. I know. I'm like, oh my God, like more evidence that she died by suicide. Like, oh, okay. But anyway, but Nancy thinks that this is evidence that Bess didn't die by suicide because she was happy. I don't know. Wild. So she also, apparently the therapist tells Nancy that she didn't mention anyone in her life that she was in conflict with. And also she mentioned that she liked to talk about growing up in her sleepy small town. Like that's mostly what they spent their sessions doing, is talking about Bess's childhood in River Heights.
And how she'd grown apart from her best friends.
Yes. Yes. And then this is where Nancy realizes that the address that she found on the sticky note in Bess's apartment is an address not in New York, but in River Heights.
Yeah, Nancy.
Yeah.
Any excuse to go home, right?
I know. You want to take it?
Sure.
This part's juicy.
Yes, it's great. So we drive to River Heights. Obviously, we pass by the big Welcome to River Heights sign, and Nancy goes straight to this like downtown Main Street area, which is where this address is. So we go and we see that it is this building that's for rent, and essentially like Bess is going to open a restaurant here, basically, and that's what she would have used the space for. Then we drive up to a little house that says Drew on the mailbox. This is gorgeous white, massive, like colonial style is the right word for it.
It's an estate.
It's huge. But so we pull in, and upon getting there, we meet Hannah. I love the depiction of Hannah here. She's wonderful. I feel like whenever we do see Hannah, she doesn't have very many lines or anything. So to like be greeted by this big warm welcome Hannah hug was fantastic. But essentially, we get like a little bit of a backstory with Hannah, and she tells Hannah that she spoke to the owner of the building there, and that's how she knows that that Bess was planning on opening a restaurant. And then she starts saying, I can't really blame Bess for wanting to move home to River Heights because maybe it's not so bad of an idea. You did that, didn't you, Hannah? You moved here to River Heights when things got hard for you. And Hannah's like, no, Nancy. There's a difference here. You are running from your problems. I moved to River Heights because your mom died and I was needed and you needed me. But you are just running from your problems. You're not going to where you're needed. You need to go back and go where you belong. You need to get back to what you're doing here, basically. You need to get back to the police. I don't know that we really need to get back to the police. I think that Nancy does need a little bit more purpose and direction in her life, certainly. But anyway, so at this point, Carson comes down the stairs and Hannah says, there's something that your father has been trying to tell you. Why don't we just get this out of the way right now? And Nancy says, oh, no, I already know. Maya's pregnant, isn't she? Carson's girlfriend. And Carson's like, oh my gosh, how did you know? And Nancy's like, well, you've been trying to tell me something really important for a while. You seem nervous about it. And also Maya's coming up the walk right now, and I can see that she is heavily pregnant. So obviously,
she says, yeah, you've been really nervous about it. Also, when I looked in the fridge, there's no lunch meat. So lunch meats are heavy in nitrates, which pregnant women can't eat. And so that's why I know. But also, she's coming up the steps right now. And so I can see she's physically pregnant.
So another one of those like Sherlockian moments where she like has to analyze everything. And
I thought this one was funny and good and well done though, because
it was well done. Yeah,
it's not clunky like the first one, because it's kind of like she is like, oh, like I could have known that from like deducing it, but really I know it from something really obvious. Like, I just thought that was funny. It was a nice like flipping on its head of that trope, which I thought was good. And I think, honestly, in a vacuum, like maybe you should have just done that. You shouldn't have done the beginning. Like just make it seem like, she could be really like Sherlock, but she's not. Like she's Nancy Drew. You know what I mean?
And she does it a couple other times in the episode, but I think that this one probably was the best one. That or at the end when she like solves the mystery. Because she goes a little bit mind palacey when she does that, and George is just like there to witness it and is blown away. Anyway. But yeah, that's pretty much all that goes on in River Heights. And then Nancy goes back to the city, and then they go to a party that's hosted by Bess's business partners, Marley and Alex. And they're celebrating some deal that they just made with a farm. So this means that the company's going national or something like that. But yeah, so they're at this like party celebrating things. And then George gets a text while they're there that confirms that the handwriting on the note that they found after Bess's death was Bess's handwriting. And George gets really upset by this, obviously, and says, I don't know anymore if Bess did it or did not. I don't know what to think, really. And so Nancy says, you know what? We're going about this all wrong. What would Bess do? Bess would tell us that we need to take a break, that we need to find a distraction, that we need to come back to this when we have a clear head and approach it then. So Nancy decides that she's going to clear her head by having sex with Alex, her business partner. Not really. My God. Not really. So
no. Well, she is going to do that. She does plan to do that.
Yeah.
But she doesn't end up doing it.
Right. So we just get this like little scene of them. It's still at his apartment because the party took place at his apartment. We're still at his apartment, but now the party's like over. Yeah. Because Marley makes a comment about like, thank you to Alex for hosting because my apartment was too small. Okay. Yeah. So we're at his apartment.
Geez. He has a big apartment then.
He does. Yeah.
I just assumed that it was like in their business, but it was like not the factory. It was like a working space or something in there.
No, it looks like a gallery. It's like this huge room. But then
how do these people have such big apartments?
Just that pickle company. That pickle money. So everyone has left the party now, and it's just Nancy and Alex sitting in the kitchen of this apartment, and they're just like chatting, and they start like making out a little bit, and Nancy's like, I need more wine. I'm not drunk enough yet. Yeah, so if you guys did not like the sex in the CW show, imagine the sex and the drinking and all that. Yeah, anyway.
Well, to be fair, this show isn't super graphic about it. We don't actually see
No.
And there's not even any implied intercourse.
Right.
Like,
it's just they kiss and that's it. We do see them take some shots and drink alcohol, though, which is definitely not the case for the CW show because she's like 19. Anyway, so they decide that they need more wine. So he goes to go get more wine, I guess. And then Nancy starts like searching through the kitchen drawers to look for a wine opener. And she sees on this paper, there's like a notepad in like one of the junk drawers or whatever. And she sees on the notepad all these like doodles of this like emoji face. It's like this like evil little devil emoji, if you guys know what I'm talking about. Well, she remembers that when she was talking to the guy that who had told her about the rehab, who had like gone for Bess's help and Carson ended up paying for it, that guy told her that like, oh, I've been struggling so much, and actually somebody last week gave me a pill and I've been like debating whether or not to take it, and it's this tab of ecstasy, and he showed it to her and it had the same little emoji printed on it, and so it kind of clicks for Nancy. Hold on, that's the exact same image. Why? And so Nancy goes over and she's like, hey, you said earlier that you were an engineering major in school. What kind of engineering did you do? And he's like, oh, chemical. And she's like, oh, crap. So then we switch to this next scene, which this is excellent. I think you should take the scene here.
Sure. So we see that Nancy has somehow gotten into the pickle factory. Laugh every time I say it. She's gotten into the pickle factory. She's on the factory floor and she's called George. So she tells George that she got away from Alex by telling him that she has a latex allergy, and so she needed to go buy sheepskin condoms before they hooked up. Which is hilarious. Anyway, she tells George that she called her here because she goes into this long like spiel. Like, they learned at the academy that they use camphor oil to make ecstasy, and she remembered that at the pickle factory they have camphor oil, and Alex or Marley or someone said that they have it because they use it on the floors, but the floors of the factory are scuffed So what's the camphor oil for? If it's not to make the floors look nicer, right? So she thinks basically that Alex came in and invested in Bess's pickle company because he knew that it would be an excellent front for manufacturing ecstasy, because they use all the same things to make pickles, I guess, as you do to make ecstasy. Who knew?
Who knew?
I guess the chemical engineer did.
I guess he did. I guess Nancy knew too somehow.
She figured it out.
She figured it out, but...
And Bess must have found out that that's why he invested in her company. That's why he became her business partner. And so she told him about it, and he tried to pay her off. That's where she got the money to send people to rehab, because he gave her this money from, keeping quiet about him manufacturing X, and she used it because she felt guilty to pay for people's rehab who were addicted to ecstasy.
That feels like Bess as well, honestly. That Bess would turn around and try to make a good situation out of it as best she could.
But then when she got pregnant, she must have had like a change of heart. She changed her mind or something, and instead just wanted out of the business. Wasn't gonna like rat him out or anything, but instead was gonna go move back to River Heights where she was happiest, open her own restaurant, right? Do her own thing, get away from this situation. But maybe Alex thought, she won't keep quiet, or thought for some reason that she might change her mind about this, and that's why she's leaving she's going to rat me out, right? Must have killed her. Ooh, so then Nancy realized, but then George brings up like her note that she left when she died. And so they look at that, and then she realizes that the note that Bess left wasn't a suicide note at all. Actually, Bess was trying to tell people what was going on and where the ecstasy was hidden in the pickle production factory.
Because she says something like, I can't look at myself every day and do this anymore. And people, that reads like a suicide note, kind of. But then you realize that
she's actually just saying, like, I can't be in this business anymore because I know that all of the drugs are behind this portrait of me that's on the wall.
A literal picture of myself. I can't look at that anymore because my picture is hiding the secret.
Yes.
This is so smart.
I know. So Nancy realizes, yes, this is where it's hidden. She opens this painting, and behind her there is a secret passageway down a hidden staircase. And there's even a cute little George's like a hidden staircase really moment, which is really sweet, which leads down to where all of the drugs are. It's just wild. So George tells Nancy, don't touch anything. Now that we found this, we got to take this seriously. I have to go get a warrant. I don't even know how I'm going to be able to explain that I know that this is here. But Nancy is like, I'll be your confidential informant or whatever. But George is like, okay, fine, whatever. Just don't touch anything. And she leaves. Nancy, for some reason, decides now that she's going to go up onto the roof. I don't know. I guess because she wants to see where Bess's murder happened. I don't know. But she goes up there, and she's listening to the voicemail that Bess sent her right before she died. And in it, she just so happens to mention that Alex is scared of heights. And so Nancy just literally just hears this, and you can see on her face that she recognizes what this means, is that Alex would never come up to the roof. He won't even go over this bridge, which is what Bess was talking about in her message. Is she asked Nancy for different directions to get to this place, so that they don't have to take the bridge that Alex is terrified of. So there is no way that he would come up onto the roof.
That tracks.
So she realizes that it must have been Marley. And right at that moment, Marley opens the door to the roof and is like, Nancy? What are you doing here? I just got all of these security notifications. We have motion detectors everywhere. Why are you here? Why are you at the factory? And so Nancy, like an idiot, tells Marley that she knows it was her for some reason. I don't know why she doesn't just try to play it off as being I just was sad and wanted to come see where, Bess's last moments were. But I'm going to go now. Bye. Like, why would you not just do that? But I guess because she's so in shock or something about like just having this realization, she's like still working through it in her brain. And so she says like, I know it was you, basically. Also, she even remembers that on the day of Bess's murder, Marley, because we know that she was the first person here, right, on the scene, she remembers that because her story was that she had biked over here, like she had gotten the message and was really close by, and so she biked over here. And so that's why she was first on the scene before even Nancy or anybody else. And Nancy remembers that her bike seat was wet. She saw her bike seat was wet. And so that means there's no way she could have just biked over because her bike seat would have been dry. And so she must have just made up this story about how she was nearby and came over. Actually, she was here the whole time because she was the one who pushed Bess off the roof.
Right.
Mind blown. And then Marley like says like it was an accident, like I didn't mean to push her. Bess was just freaking out and like it just happened, blah, 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 whatever, making all these excuses. But luckily, George overheard this whole thing, and so overheard that confession, basically. And after there's like a brief altercation between Marley and Nancy. Like Marley looks like she's about to push Nancy off the roof, but Nancy is able to like take her down or something. I don't know.
It's a pretty good tackle.
Yeah, and George arrests Marley and leads her away. Do you want to take our wrap up?
Sure. Okay. So later, it's now the next day, daytime. Nancy shows up outside of Dan Foley's house again. And he's like, get away from me, you creep. I can't talk to you. And she's like, no, please just let me apologize to you real quick. Because what really happened is my best friend had just died. I was in this kind of mindset where, it's wrong. A young woman shouldn't just die like that and have her whole future taken away from her. And I was just like so dead set on like figuring out what happened to Bess that I just couldn't let go of Anna's case, the assistant photographer. And so that's why I accused you. I was just so desperate to have somebody be responsible that I just decided it was you and it wasn't fair to you. And I'm so sorry for what that's done to you. And he just kind of like accepts it and he doesn't really say anything, but he seems to be okay with that explanation and he just kind of walks away. Then we get a shot of George and Stephanie's wedding. I love this. Nancy is giving a big toast, and she is in this absolutely gorgeous yellow dress. It looks fantastic on her. The cut and the color, everything is wonderful. So Nancy is giving this speech about how, it's her and her dad's tradition to have a gotcha day and how, like, you get to choose your own family. And now George and Stephanie will never be without love because it's their gotcha day for each other, and it's just it's sweet, and they kind of connect it and everything. But then at the reception, Nancy goes up to the lieutenant and starts talking to him a little bit, and he agrees to give Nancy her job back so long as she stays away from Anna's case, the assistant photographer. And so she agrees, and so yay, fantastic, she's back on the force now. And then they all do the electric slide in honor of Bess, and Carson and Maya are there, and Hannah's there, and Ned's there, and they all dance together, and it's really fun. And it's a cute little shot, and even the lieutenant gets into it, and they all have fun. But then we cut to a scene. I guess it's the same night. It's evening. We're at Dan Foley's apartment, and we just see him going through these papers. And then we see this woman outside. She's walking up. It's just this young woman. We've never seen her before. She just walks up. We see her walking down the street, and then we flash back inside the photographer. We look at what he's holding, and it's all these really grisly photos of what looked to be photos that he had taken directly after he'd murdered Anna. So this is like, I guess, trophies that he's kept. And he takes all the photos and he like puts them behind one of those photos that Ned had brought him, one of the kid drawings, his children's drawings, and like puts it behind the backing of that photo. So he's hiding this evidence that actually, Nancy was right. He really is the real murderer. And then we see that young woman outside. She knocks on the door and is like, "Hi, Mr. Foley. I'm here to interview for your assistant position." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm coming." And then boom, 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 Drew. And then we just get the title card again. And then that's it. Yeah.
She was right all along.
Yep. And now he's going to go murder some
Now
other
he's gonna
woman,
murder
probably.
somebody else. Yeah.
Right. And so that's going to set up, obviously, our season-long arc where Nancy's going to go find this photographer guy.
Yeah.
The end.
And that's the episode.
Yeah.
Oof. Okay. Where do we want to stay? I mean, we've already talked a lot about it up front, and I think probably in hearing that summary, all that hopefully should make sense for what I was saying at the beginning. I think ultimately having Nancy be a cop is the wrong decision, and I think that, you know, even if you wanted to start her out there, at the end of this, she should not be getting her job back on the police force. What she needs to do is she needs to go back home to River Heights, start her own private detective business, and potentially if you really wanted, if you needed Bess to be dead, then she can rent out the store rent out the building that Bess is going to rent out for her restaurant, have that be her private detecting office in honor of Bess.
Yeah.
You know? But her getting this job back with the lieutenant, and now our season-long arc is this Dan Foley guy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
If this were just a premise to get Nancy back to River Heights, back to, you know, the Nancy that we know and love, then great.
That would have been a great setup to get her home. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, you know, the conversation that she has with Hannah about how Hannah is like, you're running, like, don't run. Like, I think that's the wrong take.
Yeah.
I think because this episode really portrays Nancy as being kind of like cowardish, like a coward. And that's definitely not who Nancy is. I think Nancy can fail, and I think Nancy cannot know who she is, but I don't think there's a circumstance in where Nancy is running.
Right. Yeah.
I think Nancy can get knocked down, but I think Nancy needs to recognize that she's using those opportunities to get back up. She's not using them to run, you know?
Exactly.
Like, yeah. So that's my problem. And I think that's how you could fix it, is if you fix that, even with all the other weirdness, which is like, okay, the pickles, Bess being dead, you know, like Ned being a cheater, and the whole like sperm donor thing, and all of that, all the weird choices there. I think those can kind of come out in the wash if you can just get back to what a Nancy Drew story is, which is Nancy independent, rebellious, against the current.
Yeah.
Like that's who Nancy is. She's not a part of this big organization she's not policing people. She's not a police officer.
Right.
You know? Anyway.
I will say that writing wise, as far as the mystery itself goes, it's pretty good mystery. I like the plot twist.
Yeah.
Maybe instead what we could have done, the plot twist should have been Bess is not dead. Maybe it wasn't a murder. Maybe she had to fake her own death and go into hiding to like get away from these creeps, and so that Bess is really alive the whole time, and then surprise, Bess is going to be in the rest of the show, you know?
Yeah, I'd love that too.
That's just me wanting Bess alive. I don't think that actually works as a premise or as a plot line.
No. But if it weren't a police procedural, yes, I think that could be a plot line. It wouldn't be so early, you know? It would get there later. Like I don't even think you wouldn't get that at the first episode. You'd just have it unsolved, right?
Or instead of having it start off as Bess has been murdered, it's Bess is missing. And really it's, okay, we have to find her because she's gone into hiding to get away from these people that she's afraid of with the drugs stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's like the whole time Bess is missing, but we think she's dead. Like she's presumed dead. And then we find, at the end of the episode, we find something that just hints to the fact that maybe she's not.
Right.
Like that's all that it
Nancy clings to that for the rest of the season. Yeah.
Right. And then at the end of the season, we get some big plot point related to that. Yes. Yeah. Listen, I'm just saying, hire us. We'll fix your TV shows for you.
Any excuse to keep our Bess alive. Come on now. Just don't do this to us. That's the worst thing you could have done, was kill off Bess.
I'll do it for free. You don't even have to pay me.
Yeah, that's fine. That is A-okay.
Oh, man. Yeah. Okay, something else I want to talk about. So obviously there was the backlash about Sarah Shahi and then Nancy Drew being not white, right? Like obviously that was a big reason why people, at first at least, were not excited about this show. Well, obviously, I just want to say I think Sarah Shahi does an amazing job. I think she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's a great actress.
I don't even hate her as Nancy Drew. I think she works fine as Nancy Drew. I think the show's concept of what Nancy Drew is wrong. Sort of. I don't think Sarah Shahi's representation of Nancy Drew is wrong. I want to make that clear.
She can only do so much with the writing that she's given and the characterization that they tell her. Yeah.
Something else that I think a lot of people had an issue with, which I am which I honestly, I think maybe people had more of an issue with than Sarah Shahi's race, I think, is that George is gay. I mean, of course, we've talked about this before, but I love gay George.
I think it works great.
It works so well. Like, honestly, like, as I was watching George in this adaptation, I like this George more than I've liked any other George that I've seen on screen.
Mm-hmm.
I think they got it. Like, there is that tomboyish stuff to her. She's kind of like a hard-boiled cop, which is like, it's a little bit weird that she's a cop because, we want Nancy to be the detective. But I could absolutely see a future for George where because she supported Nancy throughout all these mysteries or whatever, she decides to go into that career. And that makes sense for her because she's athletic. She's got this like toughness to her that like really works in that kind of role. So I think George as a cop makes so much sense, and seeing her gay is just like so like, oh, it just like fills this void in my heart. You know what I mean? So yeah, so it just makes me so excited to see a gay George because like we have all of these stories where, I mean, like, I know people want to say that like they don't see George as gay, like they think that it's like stereotyping a little bit because, just because George is a tomboy doesn't mean that she's gay. Absolutely, 100%. I understand that. But I think there's just so much more to the character of George in the series that like queer codes her, right?
Sure,
like,
yeah.
Her short hair, yes, her athleticness, but also like the fact that like, she glorifies in her name George. Like she loves the name George because it's masculine, because it's not traditional. Like things like this just make the character of George so like in my mind just so queer coded. And so it's like to be able to see that like fulfill, so like yes, finally we've broken free from like this history where women had to be quiet about who they were, where women, in order to feel comfortable could only cut their hair short and,
right.
and be sporty. Like they couldn't do the things that like actually affirmed their identity. They couldn't go out with other women. They couldn't be, act as men, like
You're
they
right.
could, so
It's so nice.
I love it. So nice.
That is another good point that like the writers would have had to really know the series to have picked up on that and to be able to recognize it and give some legitimacy to it, which is really nice. It's like, yes, finally someone sees it and gives it the respect that it deserves, which is great.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Somebody did that right, which is great.
Yes.
That is, by the way, Vanessa Ferlito is her name, the actress that plays George. So love
she's
her.
in something else. She's in another procedural show, isn't she?
I have never seen her in anything else.
Let me see. Another CBS crime. Oh, she's in CSI New York.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah. So another crime procedural TV show. Yeah. She found her calling, her niche. I love the portrayal of George. I feel like finally, like it seems like I'm watching, it's like finally somebody gets it. Somebody gets George, and it's not like it's not a bad depiction, like they don't make her into some asshole. Like she's an actually warm, like lovely, like character. And she can be a little bit like she can be a little bit tough and like hard boiled seeming, but it's like at her core, no, she's great, So it's like, I love that for George.
She's a lot more than she ever is in the books, because I feel like she's
Right.
a lot of the times, unfortunately, she's pretty one-dimensional in the books. So to give her
Yeah.
more this way, it was really nice to see her like that.
Yeah. And it's just so sad that, like, we didn't get this. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't get this George portrayal. This was never put out into the world. So, oh, sad. But anyway. Another thing I want to say is that I think that the issue is that I think they don't understand what a Nancy Drew story is, like what or it should be, you know, which I kind of talked about at the beginning. But I think something else that makes this unsuccessful, which is I think probably why this didn't get picked up as a pilot. I think it not being, in my mind, like a detective story because it's a police procedural. I think that's why it wouldn't be successful, and that's why it's not successful for Nancy Drew fans. But I don't think that's necessarily the reason it wasn't picked up by CBS. I think the reason why it wasn't picked up by CBS is because there is a very clear tone issue with the show, because it seems like they're trying to find. There's like this really severe darkness to it with, you know, suicide and drugs and all of this stuff. Trauma, severe, like all
really
of this.
Heavy trauma.
Really heavy stuff. Murder, like, but then also they try to make it like comedy, like funny. And they juxtapose those like so aggressively, like at the very beginning of the episode where we see Bess falling off the roof. And then it jumps to like the snappy music and Nancy's driving Lyft. Like, it's like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? Like, I don't know what I'm watching here. What do you pick a lane? And I think there is a way to have both, like, and like you were talking about, but also like, and even if you wanted to make it really, you know, off the cuff and like dark humor and yes, juxtapose those things really severely or whatever, I think you could do that. But I think just like the quality of the show in being a procedural and the writing and all, it's just not good enough to carry that. And so I think it needs to pick a lane, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's just when you watch it, it's like, weird. It's like you don't really know. You're like, where are you going? What are you trying to say with this? And then also, I think there was an issue not with the actors who do a great job at making the best out of some things, but like the writing is awkward. Like some of it's really awkward. Like it's cheesy. Like the way that they like relate to each other, and some of Nancy's lines, it's cheesy, and it's like. So are you trying to be like wholesome and lean into that, or are you trying to make it realistic in real life? Because you're trying to do both, and I don't understand both, and that's also really it's like uncomfortable to watch. And so if you're going to lean into that cheese and whatever, you need to make it comedy. You need to make it almost parody to be honest, if you're trying to pull off Nancy Drew, which I don't think anybody wants.
No, nobody wants we talked about this with the Emma Roberts show. It's not comedy, and Nancy's never been funny.
Exactly. But I think that's the only, like, if you wanted to do that cheese, that's really the only way that it functions in a script like that. And it's just not successful. So I think that's the problem. That's why CBS didn't want it. They're like, this doesn't make sense. This, or at least makes less sense than this other female-led crime procedural show that we could choose, right? Sad. A little sad.
Yeah.
But ultimately, at the core, I liked a lot of things about it. I think a lot of the choices that they made, as far as like the characters go, I would make too. I would just do it in a different way.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I love George's characterization. I love that they've made her gay. I love the Minnie Cooper, like I said. I'm not a huge fan of the Carson portrayal with the younger girlfriend, but I do like the Nancy Carson dynamic. Loved Hannah. Absolutely loved Hannah. Could have used more scenes with her. Like I said, I really liked some of the outfits that they put Nancy in. I felt like they looked like what Nancy would wear or what I picture her as wearing. A lot of the other things were just kind of fell short for me, though. But you're right. There's a lot that you can compliment about it.
I think the thing that I enjoyed the most about it was the dynamics between the characters in the show. Like you were talking about, I think Ned and Nancy's worked out really well, even though I don't like Carson's character. I think the way that they interact together works really well. I think Nancy and George, their interaction was just so good, so good. And even George with her fiance and Nancy's and Ned's, and like I think Nancy's and Hannah, like I think like at the core they understood the relationships that these people had to each other and how that would translate to when they were older, which I thought was just really interesting to watch, because that's not really something that we have ever had, you know? And so, yeah. But of course that doesn't fix the issues that exist with
Bess is still dead, so...
Bess is still dead!
All of it's for the garbage. Anyway.
Seriously.
Just kidding. No, I do think that, like you said, George's characterization and the dynamic between them, it's extremely important. George basically has to, like, carry the show. Like, other than Nancy, George is the second most important character in this. So they had to get George perfect. Otherwise, that dynamic would have been really wrong, and the rest of it would have been unwatchable if that hadn't gone well, you know?
Yeah. I do think it's interesting, too, to have a, like, female detective pair. Right?
Yeah.
Which is not something we get very often in crime procedurals. And maybe that's where some of those rumors about it being too female came from, is the fact that we didn't get a man and a woman, which sometimes we get. You know, we didn't get two men, which we get a lot. Like, we got two women to lead it, which is, I feel like is different. But I think it was great. I think it was great. Especially them being like childhood friends. It just led to like such banter, you know, like that. I think they did that really well. So, okay.
I think that's all my notes. Do you have anything else you want to say about it?
I think that's all my notes too. Yeah. Oh, I wrote Team Stephanie.
Yes.
Stephanie. Yeah, no, I think that's it. That's all I have. Yeah.
Cool. Well, the hard question.
Oh, God.
Flashlight score.
It's like it surprises me every time I have to do this, even though I know that we do this at the end of every episode. I'm never thinking about it until it becomes time, and then I'm like, oh, I have to pick a score. I think 3. I think I would give it a 3. Yeah, just a round 3.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in the measure, everything, I think it is neither good nor bad. It is right in the middle. You know what I mean?
That's fair. Yeah. I think I'd give it a 2.5.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't quite do it for me. Again, we're not comparing anything. I like the 2019 show way better. I'm glad that eventually the show was passed on so that it could make way for the show that we did get. But yeah, I mean, it did some things very, very well. Don't want to bash it, but ultimately maybe it is for the better that it did not end up airing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that in the course of history, that's probably what was supposed to happen, you know, because the 2019 CW show it's for the teens. Like, it just feels more appropriate.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this show would have been as popular as the CW show is.
No, their target audience was 30, 40-year-olds for sure. And the CW show, the target audience is high schoolers.
Right.
You know,
and so
teenagers,
it just doesn't, you wouldn't, I don't think you would get this show past the first season, maybe 2.
Yeah.
Just because I don't think, it would, the sustainability for it isn't there, because the fan base wouldn't be interested and wouldn't like it as much, you know, because it's not traditionally like Nancy Drew. So, yeah.
Oh, well.
I enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got the opportunity to see it at all, because who doesn't want more Nancy Drew just in general?
Definitely. But next up, oh my God, Kori, we're going from exciting thing to exciting thing. You guys are going to be, I mean, I already know you guys are really excited, because the next thing we're going to be cover is actually releasing very soon. It's brand new, Nancy Drew.
In fact, by the time this airs, it'll have just come out, right? I think.
Let me double check. This comes out on May 24th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, well. Yes, but you're like, I wonder, what on earth could you be talking about? What's new? New Nancy Drew? Is it Nancy Drew Diary? No.
Just the most anticipated game of the last decade.
Mystery of the Seven Keys. It's finally coming out this month. We're recording this in May, so it's coming out literally next week. So we will be playing it right along with all of you guys playing it. I'm sure we will be posting a little bit about it as we play it. And so, yeah, we're going to get to talk about it in episode 86. We're very excited to do a full deep dive and hear everybody's thoughts and how everybody enjoyed it or did not enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And we will tell you everything that we thought when we get there. So
Yes.
we hope you'll tune in then, regular Drews.
Yeah, we'll see y'all then.
Thank you for listening to Regular Nancy Drew. Email us at regularnancydrew@gmail.com.
If you like this episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Regular Nancy Drew and Twitter at RegularND.
You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons at the $3 level vote on upcoming episode topics and get exclusive access to our Scoop Sesh series.
And all patrons receive early access to each episode as well as weekly bonus content.
And to all you regular Drews out there,
Thanks for listening.